Snow fell in long, unhurried veils that winter, soft as breath, endless as silence. It gathered on the old cabin roof, whispering down the seams of the world until sound itself seemed to disappear. Inside, Dakota Callahan sat before a dying fire, watching embers pulse like fading stars. His days had become measured by the crackle of wood and the sigh of wind through broken shingles. Once, long ago, he'd lived by the rhythm of hoofbeats and the weight of laughter shared across campfires. Now he lived by the stillness he'd built to keep memory from knocking too loud. He had not spoken to another soul in nearly 3 years. Not since the duel by Red Creek, where a man's life ended by his gun and his own voice followed it into silence. He told himself he'd come here to forget, but forgetting had turned out to be another kind of remembering. Every night, when snow pressed its face to the window, he could still see that last look in the dying man's eyes, one of recognition, not hate. It hollowed him. Some mornings, he wondered if he'd stopped existing too. And then the coyote's cry or the groan of ice would remind him that the world kept turning, with or without him. He was mending the hinge on the cabin door when he heard it, soft footsteps crunching through the snow. Too light to be a man's, too hesitant for a beast. He straightened, heart thudding once and then refusing to do it again. The steps came closer, halting, then resumed. He reached for his revolver out of habit, though the metal felt cold and foreign in his hand. When he opened the door, the storm greeted him first, white flurries rushing past like startled ghosts. Then, from that blur, she appeared. A young woman, wrapped in deerskin and frost, half bent against the wind. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes, black as wet stone, locked on his. For a long second, neither moved. Then she swayed forward, knees folding, and knelt at his threshold as if the weight of the snow had finally found her bones. "Please," she said, voice trembling with the cold. "I need warmth." Dakota didn't know what made him step aside. Instinct, maybe. Or something older, some pulse beneath his ribs that remembered what mercy used to feel like. He guided her in, wordless, shut the door, and fed the fire with the last of his dry wood. Her hands were blue at the edges, her lips, pale. She carried no weapon, no pack, only a small pouch strung around her neck. When she caught him looking at it, she tucked it beneath her tunic without a word. He poured her water, clumsy from disuse. She took it, fingers brushing his, and even that slight touch startled him. The air between them seemed alive again, moving differently, charged. After a while, she said, "You're Dakota Callahan." The sound of his name after years of silence hit him like a strike of thunder through glass. He hadn't told her. He hadn't told anyone in years. "You should rest," he muttered, the words scraping up like rust. His voice startled him too, rough and brittle, as though it had forgotten how to form sound. She smiled faintly. "I will. But I had to be sure." He studied her more closely then. Beneath the layers of cold and exhaustion, there was something fierce, an unspoken steadiness. Her eyes carried stories the way the prairie carried wind. He wanted to ask what she meant, how she knew his name, but the words wouldn't come. He hadn't used curiosity in so long, it felt like reopening a wound. That night, she slept by the fire while Dakota sat awake, listening to her breathe. The cabin, once a coffin of silence, felt strangely full. Every small sound, a sigh, the rustle of her blanket, seemed enormous. He found himself afraid to sleep, afraid she might vanish by morning, leaving him once more to the hush of his exile. He didn't know yet that this fear was the beginning of something gentler. When morning came, the snow had deepened. Outside, the world was nothing but white. Inside, the woman stirred, blinking as if unsure where she was. "No Comus," she said softly when he asked her name. It suited her, something that belonged to the wind and the fire alike. She thanked him for saving her life. He shook his head. "Didn't do much," he said, but she looked at him as if she disagreed. As the storm raged on, they fell into a rhythm of necessity. He chopped wood while she dried herbs from a pouch she'd carried, murmuring to them as though they were kin. Her presence changed the sound of the cabin. There were now small human noises, clattering tin, soft humming, the faint scrape of her needle as she mended his torn coat. He found himself waiting for those sounds without meaning to. He began to wonder what had brought her here, so far from any trail. Once, while they sat by the fire, he asked. "I was looking for you," she said simply. The words didn't fit the air. He stared at her, disbelief tugging at his chest. "Why?" She met his gaze. "Because people said you killed a man. Because people said you disappeared to escape your own shadow. I wanted to see if that was true." He turned away. The fire popped. "You shouldn't believe everything people say." She smiled, not cruelly, but with quiet understanding. I don't. That's why I came to see for myself. Her calm unnerved him. The world had always met him with judgment or pity, never with curiosity. He found himself wanting to speak, to defend himself, but the words tangled in shame. He stared into the flames, and for the first time in years, he wished someone could see him as something other than what he'd been. Days passed. The storm softened into flurries. They began to talk, not much, but enough. She told him about her people, how her village had scattered after soldiers burned their winter grounds. Her voice held no bitterness, only fatigue. Sometimes, she said, survival is just another kind of silence. He understood. Too well. One morning, a shadow crossed their window, human, heavy-booted. A man's voice called out, sharp as cold iron. Dakota tensed, reaching for the rifle. He stepped outside to find a trader he half recognized, Jed Rourke, a man who'd known him before the duel. Rourke's eyes narrowed at the sight of the woman inside. Well, I'll be damned, Jed said. Didn't think you'd keep company with one of them. Thought you'd turned hermit after Red Creek. Dakota's jaw tightened. You've said your piece. Jed smirked. Careful, cowboy. Folks still remember what you did. And her kind, well, they say she's got witch blood. People talk. The wind seemed to hush at those words. Nokomis stood just inside, expression unreadable. Dakota's voice dropped. Then let them talk. Jed lingered, searching his face for the old violence that used to live there. Finding none, he spat into the snow and rode off, leaving the air heavy with ghosts. Inside, Dakota couldn't meet her eyes. The shame burned too familiar, too deep. He's right about me, he said finally. I killed a man. Doesn't matter why. She stirred the fire. Then live like it matters. He looked up, confused. What do you mean? She met his gaze evenly. If you were only what you've done, you'd be ish already. You're still breathing. That means there's something left to build. Her words landed softly, but they stayed. That night, when she hummed that same low tune, the one that sounded like the world before language, he listened. Not out of politeness, but because it filled the hollow in him with something he hadn't felt since before the gunfight. Maybe peace. Maybe forgiveness trying to find its way through frost. Winter thickened around them, yet the cabin felt warmer than it ever had. They moved through their days like two souls testing the edges of something fragile and unnamed. He began speaking more, slowly, each word like a step across ice. She laughed sometimes, and each time she did, the sound made him want to become someone worthy of it. One evening, as twilight folded over the plains, she reached for his hand and placed it over her heart. The gesture was simple, but it stopped time. You hear that? She whispered. That's the sound of someone staying. The fire flickered. He felt the pulse under his palm, steady and alive, and for the first time, he believed that silence didn't mean emptiness. It could mean listening. Then came the night of the gunshots. 3 cracks in the distance, familiar, cruel. Rourke and 2 others rode toward the cabin, torches cutting through the dark. Come out, Callahan, the voice shouted. You hiding behind her now? Nokomis stood. Her eyes held no fear, only calm resolve. They don't know who you are anymore, she said softly. He rose, every muscle trembling. Then I'll remind them, without the gun this time. He stepped outside, snow swirling around him like ash. The men raised their rifles, but he didn't draw his own. He lifted his hands. There's nothing here worth taking, he said. No fight left in me. The men hesitated, thrown by his stillness. Nokomis came to stand beside him, her shawl fluttering in the storm. Her voice carried, clear and unwavering. This land doesn't belong to hate anymore. The wind howled between them. Slowly, the torches lowered. The men turned their horses and rode back into the white, their shadows swallowed by snow. Dakota looked at her, disbelief trembling into awe. You could have left, he said. She smiled faintly. Maybe I already did. Maybe I just found where I was meant to stop. The snow eased, falling softer now, gentler. He felt the weight of years lift, not gone, but lighter. Inside, the fire burned low, steady. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Weeks later, the thaw began. Ice broke into streams that sang through the valley. The world was new again, or maybe just forgiving. A wandering preacher passed through, and with no audience but the mountains and the wind, Dakota and Nokomis were married. There were no vows, only quiet promises made through touch and breath. That evening, as they stood outside the cabin watching snow melt into wildflowers, she laughed, a sound so free it startled the air. Maybe silence was never empty, she said, leaning into him. Maybe it was just waiting to be heard. He looked out over the plains, where winter had once buried everything he was, and whispered, "Then I'm listening." And for the first time in a long, long while, the world seemed to answer back.